Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. Well, good morning, and here we are at the Black Horse, and ready to bring you the news headlines. We've had a fascinating hour with the two Bs, whose topic this morning was the carry-on films. You never know what they're going to come up with, those two, but there they are, in a row, the two of them, and they always have something fascinating, and they really know their topics too, which is really very gratifying. People like myself and some of the others in this business who absolutely don't know what we're talking about, but carry on regardless. And that's what they were about this morning, the carry on films. And their extensive knowledge was very impressive. But now it's time for us at 9 o'clock, well, that's in 2 minutes' time, to take a look at the news headlines and the front pages, and to catch up with the national news. And I think that the first thing to do is to look at the weather, because it's pretty miserable outside. It's pretty damn dire, in fact. So much so that this morning I actually came in on the bus. I did not risk the Red Devil, and outside it's warm. It's actually 15 degrees, and it's going to be 15 degrees all day up until 3 o'clock this afternoon, when it dips to 13. Not much of a dip, but it's also throughout the morning until late morning, beginning of the afternoon, 12 o'clock, they're going to be gusty with pretty fierce winds and heavy rain. So do be careful when you go outside this morning. It is not pleasant. It is not pleasant at all. And what do we expect for the rest of the week? Tomorrow, more rain and not quite as warm as today, 13 degrees. Wednesday dips a little bit more, but then it steadies itself before on this coming weekend. Next Saturday, the temperature raises again to 15. Not exactly to get a tan, but not a bad temperature at all. But it's Wednesday before we get scattered sunshine in any measure. And then Thursday again, way back to cloud and rain. And Friday, some measure of sunshine. Saturday, back to cloud and rain. It's up and down, in and out, not at all a happy situation. However, let's look at other unhappy situations, because it is now 9 o'clock, and time for us to find out what the newspapers' headlines are. And the Mirror is... have you no shame, it says, talking about the Home Secretary at the Senate House. 24 hours after Armistice Day, violence, her words help to incite. I'm sorry, but I think that modern newspapers are just following fashion. And that's because they're not independent anymore. They do what the boss says, and the boss is some faceless character who owns all the shares. This is what you say. I see nothing more than she's stated her point of view. And since we've got a spineless bloody cabinet, and have had for quite some time, whatever she says is got to be all right with me, because she speaks her mind. And frankly, I think that have you no shame should be asked of the Mirror. Have you no shame? Have you no shame that you don't actually tell the news anymore, that you're just a political piece of tract? It's disappointing, to say the least. The Daily Express it's got a picture of the king and yes, it's got a picture of the king and Kate on the front page, and it says king and country fall silent to pay their respects. But the main headline is, will Suella survive the Prime Minister's reshuffle? The Daily Express has another question. Will Suella survive the Prime Minister's reshuffle? The paper reports Miss Braverman is clinging on to her job, and speculation about an imminent reshuffle following her controversial comments on policing and protests. The fact of the matter is, of course, every Prime Minister has to be very careful because he sacks somebody now. Is when he ceases to be Prime Minister, he comes back and bites him in the ass. The Daily Mail is solemn Kate's double tribute to the late Queen on the day respect for the fallen was restored. And then it says, Suella comes out fighting. Marchers valorize terrorism and pollute streets with hate, says the Home Secretary, as she defies critics who want her sacked. Yeah, it's all these sort of wimby nimbys who want her sacked. Is you may not agree with her. That you've got every right to, and that I would encourage. But get rid of her. Get rid of her. You know that's the problem. There are more people of talent and conviction lying in the gutter because of this nimby-wimby approach. It's really very disappointing. The Mail's headline reads, Suella comes out fighting, as it reports on the Home Secretary accusing pro-Palestinian marchers of polluting the streets. It says the move is defying critics who want her sacked. The Times. Arrest anti-Semitic yobs now, Sunak will tell Met. Well, that's a bit more, it got more strength to it, hasn't it? The Times splashes on a slightly different angle following the scenes at demonstrations on Armistice weekend. Arrest anti-Semitic yobs now, Sunak will tell the Met. The paper reports on possible new laws the Prime Minister is considering as part of a crackdown on protests. Now, that is the sad thing. Nobody should actually petition against protests as such. If there are some rules, yes, but cracking down on protests is not the way forward. That is anti-democratic. That doesn't give or allow a voice. The problem is, it's like everything, there are some extremes. Yes, crack down on the extremists, but not on protests as such. We need to have that valued freedom of speech, freedom of action in this country. We've always had it, and we always should have it. And that should not be taken away. The Daily Telegraph, Braverman, the hate marches must end. Telegraph picks up on a similar theme as it too highlights the planned toughening of laws to prevent protests that pollute the streets. Its front page's headline reads, Braverman, the hate marches must end. Well, yes, they must. They must. And the big problem is that the people, extremists, tend to hijack decent protests. And that is something that we need to pay attention to. But surely, with all the great brains that we've got in Westminster and in academia, surely they can come up with some way of trying to identify where the extremists are and who is a normal, ordinary protester who doesn't like what's going on. The Sun, never again, as Kate marks silence, new laws to protest remembrance. The Sun also reports on planned new laws to protect remembrance. The paper says the clamoring on statues and using fireworks at protests will become illegal. Never again, its headline reads. The Metro. Tears for the Fallen, and it shows Kate in very somber mood at the cenotaph. And it also has a sub-headline, Beleaguered Braverman battles on with praise for the police. The Metro's picture of the Princess of Wales on Remembrance Sunday, underneath a picture of other members of the royal family. Tears for the Fallen, the headline reads, as it looks beyond the politics and weekend unrest. Hunt considers pre-Christmas tax cuts to lift the Tory gloom. That's the eye. Well, that's a change in a switch in emphasis, and I'm sure welcomed by many people. The eye leads on the Prime Minister and Chancellor apparently considering tax reductions before Christmas. Cuts to inheritance tax and stamp duty could be on the agenda in a bid to appease restive Conservative MPs and narrow the polling gap with Labour. The paper reports under the headline, Hunt considers pre-Christmas tax cuts to lift Tory gloom. The Guardian, mould and squalid housing make the NHS crisis worse. The Guardian always manages to avoid a controversial headline if it can. It looks at different stories. They are not without worth. And don't think that I'm being critical of The Guardian. Not in that sense, anyway. Is the fact of the matter is we've got 8 broadly important newspapers, and they should be expressing different views and even different stories. So the Guardian splashes on a story reporting that thousands of babies and toddlers are being admitted to hospital in England each year with lung conditions linked to where they live. The paper is headlined, Mould and Squalid Housing Makes the NHS Crisis Worse. Financial Times, which is beginning to really establish it as a paper of some note, is Washington warns Israel not to attack Gaza hospitals. So the FT splashes on the US officials telling their Israeli counterparts to avoid bombing hospitals and alarm at dire conditions for patients. Here is my favorite, the Daily Star. What is it going to headline on? For sneeze-ons with year-long hay fever. It's the perfect storm, it says. 500-mile tempests to hit the UK, up to 10 days of non-stop rain. Ooh. The Star splashes on weather and hay fever, saying it's the perfect storm. The paper suggests that hay fever season is not over and predicts up to 10 days of non-stop rain for the UK, with 500-mile tempests on the way. Wow. Well, that's the headlines, and it is interesting to see the different take by different papers on Suella. Suella Braverman and her comments. I think that the unfortunate thing of some papers is that they are so tied to a political viewpoint and political masses that they have stopped doing what they should be doing, and that is taking an independent view, giving us the facts. Give us the facts. Don't editorialize. By all means, have an editorial. Take a viewpoint. But don't editorialize in what you pretend is news. That is not right and proper for a good news organization. Not right and proper indeed. And some papers have made what Suella Braverman has been saying is sound dreadful. But at long last, we're getting some sort of sense from one or two papers that you will see the liberal establishment sniffing and saying, I don't actually read that paper. No, well, I'm sorry, but all newspapers and this radio station, and this television station, we all get to using some form of bias, if you like, without meaning to. But this idea that newspapers must take terribly middle line forever and a day is not in keeping with the tradition of our papers. The history of our papers begins with Charles I, and the early pamphleteers would hammer up on the wall a pamphlet which was normally anti-monarchist and then run like hell, because if they were caught by the king's men, inevitably their heads were forfeit. Off with his head, said the king and the king's men. So we don't really have a tradition of being absolutely so neutral that we become dull and boring. By the same token, is how far do we take our viewpoint? How far do we take what we think and attach it to the news? It's a difficult one, a very difficult one. Generally speaking, I think the English press does a fair old job. A fair job. But by the same token, is we can't help but get carried away by some things, and we shouldn't let it get in the way. It's 12 minutes past 9. At 10 o'clock, we'll be going to France, and Harry Atherton, and hopefully with him will be a young lady who is the tourist aficionado for his particular area, and we can hear their take on the tourist industry and where's a good place to go and what's a good place to eat, what's changing in France. And then at 11, we have Liza Page with the, of course, to 11, have Liza Page with the alternative view. So that's where we're at, and hopefully we will try to give you as best we can. Let's just run through those newspaper headlines again, but in a slightly different way. The Sun says the Prime Minister wants to make it easier to ban marches and demonstrations after what happened on Armistice Day. It says clambering on statues and using fireworks at protests could be prohibited, while laws on glorifying terrorists would be hardened. Never again, the paper's headline reads. The Daily Telegraph echoes the latest words of Home Secretary Suella Braverman, saying the government aims to toughen laws to prevent protests that, in her words, pollute the streets. It reports the Prime Minister wants to remove any doubt that the police can and should intervene on hate speech. The Times reports that Rishi Sunak will meet the Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley on Monday or Tuesday and is expected to ask why more arrests weren't made, despite images of marchers waving swastikas and wearing Hamas-style headbands. The paper says Sir Mark is expected to emphasise that officers quelled disorder despite facing unacceptable violence. The Express says Suella Braverman is clinging on to her job after her controversial comments on policing and protests. The Express traditionally is a government-supporting paper. So if in fact it's saying that, the chances are that's coming from inside government. The Daily Mirror focuses on what it says are growing calls for the Home Secretary to quit. The paper has a photo of Suella Braverman at the Cenotaph on Sunday, 24 hours after the Armistice Day violence, which it says she helped to incite. Have you no shame? The Mirror's headline asks, under a picture of far-right protesters clashing with police on Saturday. In contrast, the Daily Mail says the Home Secretary is defying critics who want her sacked. The paper says she's come out fighting with her condemnation of the ugly scenes at the weekend after being accused of stoking up tension. Well, it depends where you stand, I suppose. 7 charged as police hunt others after protests. The Prime Minister facing a tough week on Braverman and Rwanda. Well, that's going to raise its head again. It's sending illegal immigrants to Rwanda via plane. Well, I doubt if actually they're going to have free champagne on board those 747s that are standing by to take them down to Rwanda. Will Suella survive PM's reshuffle? Asked the Daily Express. and what it calls fevered speculation that the Prime Minister will shake up his top team. The paper says Miss Braverman is clinging on to her job after her controversial comments on policing and protests. Well, I don't know, it sounds to me as if the Prime Minister might have actually been sensible and listen to what she said. The Eye reports that Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is considering pre-Christmas cuts to inheritance tax and stamp duty to, as the paper puts it, lift Tory gloom. It says many Conservative MPs believe such a move is key to defeating Labour at the next general election. The Chancellor has previously said he won't cut taxes while inflation remains high, but the paper suggests that figures out this week could show inflation has fallen below the 5% limit. The Guardian reports that thousands of babies and toddlers are being admitted to hospital in England each year with lung problems, probably linked to their living conditions. A senior doctor, Andy Knox, tells the paper that damp and mold-ridden homes are having a profoundly negative impact on the nation's health. Figures suggest damp is 5 times more common in private rented homes than in owner-occupied ones. The Housing Department says everyone deserves to live in a safe and decent home, and that's why the government is determined to crack down on rogue landlords. Finally, the papers capture the solemnity of the Remembrance Sunday services at the Cenotaph. The Telegraph says peace and dignity prevailed as the King laid a wreath for the fallen. The Mirror says there was a dignified silence after Saturday's melee. For the Express, Remembrance Sunday was a balm to our troubled soul. Well, there you are. That's what the papers are saying. Those are the headlines. We'll take a few minutes now away from things, give you time for a calm and dignified silence, instead of taking a breath after watching or listening to Mirador. And we will be back with approximately before 10 o'clock, but with Harry Atherton at 10. Right, you are. Let's we'll say toodle pip for the moment, and this is where we're at. From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub.